My expectations were that it was going to be a very dark psychological analysis of a serial killer. And it's really not that in the slightest, you know. I mean, I think that Bret Easton Ellis saw these privileged young guys in Manhattan behaving badly in the 80s and sort of asked himself, well, how far will they go and how much can they get away with? And that's why you have this sort of ludicrous idea of Bateman being a serial killer. But it's an analysis of these yuppies, of Wall Street at the time, of these trust fund kids, and of men, you know, and violence. And I had no idea that that was what it was going to be, and that Bateman would cut such a ridiculous figure as well. You know, he's endlessly entertaining. Not somebody that you'd want to know, but certainly somebody that, you know, you would find fascinating to eavesdrop on, you know, in a restaurant. He's not somebody that could really exist, you know. Bateman could never be a real person, and I didn't approach it from a point of realism, you know. I didn't go into motivation at all, because this is a man who has nothing instinctive inside of him. Everything is a cerebral choice that he makes. He could just as easily, you know, compliment somebody and shake their hand, or pick up an axe and take their head off, because he has no conscience, so therefore he has no limits on what, you know, he can do. But he's very, very intelligent, you know, and it's sort of his knowledge and certainty about the environment that he lives in and the complete shallowness of it that drives him crazy, you know, knowing that any search for meaning whatsoever within his life is utterly pointless. Physically, you know, it was essential. It wasn't just the vanity of an actor that Bateman have a six-pack and all of that. You know, he talks about it. He's incredibly narcissistic. You know, the aesthetic is always important with every character, but more so with Bateman. You know, with him, the clothes really do make the man. And much as the same way as I would arrive on the set, put on the suits, have my hair done and everything, makeup, and then be able to play Bateman, he does exactly the same thing in his mornings with his routine. He puts on his mask in order to be able to perform, you know, for the rest of the day. So, you know, I had to work out like crazy for that. And then the psychology of him, you know, was interesting, because it was turning on its head all of the basic rules of acting, you know, that you be, firstly, be completely unself-conscious. You know, Bateman's completely self-conscious. He's absolutely aware at every moment of the impression that he's giving, of appearing realistic. It didn't matter, you know. Bateman is a performance, so normally you have to disguise a performance. With this, it didn't matter that I reveal a performance, you know, it was essential for it. It was sort of, you know, an acting teacher's nightmare. Because of the stylization and the fact that I chose to do him as a performer himself, I could turn him off, you know, very, very quickly. There was no sort of haunting of me, you know, by Bateman at all. Well, I think that, you know, Mary looked at the book and saw all of the intelligence and the satire and the wit of the piece, and on the one hand, the great black comedy that's there. I mean, it is undeniably funny, even though you feel guilty at times for laughing, blended with the horror and the bleakness and the disturbing comment on men and violence and on capitalism, and that's what she took from the book. It could have very easily become a slasher flick, and there are obviously elements of a slasher flick within this, but it's more within Bateman's head. Many of the scenes I played as though it's Bateman's fantasies of being the lead in his own movie, whether that be his own porno movie or his own action movie or his own horror movie, you know, like with the chainsaw scene. But I think that, you know, to have reduced it to a gore fest would have been to deny all of the intelligence that, you know, it deserves. It jumped from one genre to the next extremely quickly, and that was, you know, it seemed like something almost impossible to pull off, but, you know, I think that Mary has. It's been accused of not being violent enough by some fans of the book. The book is far more violent, you know. I mean, it gets incredibly graphic. I just don't think that can work as well in movies. Firstly, there's a question of how do you show any sort of violence without celebrating it? And it's a difficult question, but certainly not by showing it as it's described in the book. I think that many people will be surprised, because the violence in the movie is primarily in the tone of the piece, in the atmosphere, in the thought processes, rather than actually being, physically revealed. Even when there is physical violence, it tends to be on Bateman and left more to the imagination of the viewer, which always works much better. I mean, I think that, Mary thought that it would be quite interesting, me being British, because I would have an understanding of the whole class system, viewing Bateman as a member of the American upper classes. There are obviously these kind of characters in every country. This is an exaggeration of the Manhattan, species of this. But Bateman couldn't exist outside of, his clubs in New York, outside of his offices. He couldn't exist in many areas of Manhattan, let alone outside of Manhattan in the rest of the states. But he is the image of sort of the American dream of glamour, wealth, sophistication, in the backs of magazines, of Interview, of W, this apparently charmed life, which, when you take a closer look, is really not so charmed and is absolutely soulless and vacant.